It's 10 o'clock sharp, 7 o'clock in Vancouver, where my colleague Des is, or it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Europe. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar that's being presented by Sinorbis and HEM. We're excited to officially launch our partnership between both our organizations. And today we're going to focus on master the art of digital recruitment in Asia. I mean, it's a very big market, as you all know, and we're very excited to present to you our slides. Before we get started, in terms of housekeeping, yes, this is being recorded. We normally send out the slides. It'll come out tomorrow. Slides and recording will be sent to everyone who registered for this webinar. We've got 45 minutes planned and scheduled for this session. We've got lots of content, which we should have time for about between 5 and 10 minutes of questions for those of you who have any. By all means, you can pop them into the Q&A box. Depending on the question, we may answer it in real time, or we'll deal with it towards the end of the session. So in terms of our agenda, there's three key elements that we'll be touching on. We're going to focus on why is Asia important. Then we're going to highlight some of the challenges and nuances, and then focus on systems and support that are available for China, India, Vietnam, and Japan. So I'd like to have my colleague Desmond to introduce himself. Desmond, welcome.
Thank you so much, Philip, and great to be here for everybody. For those who don't know me or don't know Sinorbis, my name is Des. I'm the Director of Global Business Development at the company. Currently headquartered in Vancouver, like Philip mentioned, but just about to move to London to set up our European operations. So for anyone in Europe joining the call today, looking forward to hopefully meeting you all in person very soon. What my role really is helping education institutions around the world in developing their strategy for their international digital, especially in Asia. And very happy to be working with partners like Philip to turn that into a reality. A lot of what Sinorbis is, for those who don't know, and why I guess we're qualified to talk about this space, is that we're a software company that allows any Western business to build, manage, and operate their digital presence in Asia with a single unified system. So taking care of all of the technical elements and firewalls and all of those kinds of concerns, but adding in that operational efficiency for coordination of all the different channels you may be using. And today, of course, we'll go through what those channels are and what best practice looks like and what you need to get going and see success. Over to you, Philip.
Thank you, Des. Well, I'm Philip. I'm the CEO of HEM. We're focused on providing some digital marketing and student recruitment services globally, which is why we actually partnered with Sinorbis, which is the leader in the technology solutions for that market. We've been active since 2008. I've seen the evolution of digital recruitment significantly over the years, and we felt that this partnership was well aligned with our values, which are similar to Sinorbis's, and we collaboratively can, using their technology, help organizations and institutions develop, empower, and use the system to better reach those markets. So that's how HEM can support you to achieve your objectives in those markets.
And just as a final little reference, maybe this may have been important before talking about digital marketing in Asia, and you see two Caucasian men talking about it. Our experience in this space is extensive, and just wanting to articulate the fact that both HEM and Sinorbis worked with many institutional partners around the world in this space and have seen best practice firsthand, what works, and also importantly, what doesn't work. And we'll be able to talk to some of these examples as well, and HEM in turn. Beautiful. So we may start with why Asia is important. Obviously, assuming that if you've clicked on this webinar, chances are you already feel that way. But just to articulate the opportunity here in full, what we see in Asia is that it's the growth market for international recruitment, constantly increasing numbers year on year for students being sent abroad for study. But that growth is stable. And this is a huge difference in what separates Asia from other, high potential growth markets, like in, say, East Africa. Financial instability has caused applications to skyrocket and trough in equal parts. So it's very hard to predict, whereas the growth that we've seen from Asia has been consistent. So not only is it incredibly important now, but it will continue to be for the foreseeable future. And this is why Asia is so important. Not to mention its size. If you take China and India, just the two of those markets, I mean, that's a third of the planet. So, these aren't necessarily just individual countries and markets. These are civilizational states that will play an enormous role in any company and any institution for the foreseeable future. So what we've seen is a combination of growth and risk, hence why Asia has been so important going forward. So if you don't have a bona fide Asia strategy set up yet, hopefully this webinar gives you some ideas as well about how you may incorporate that given its importance. But of course, what we're going to talk about today primarily is the challenges and how to overcome them, especially on the digital side. And I'll leave that to Philippe just to start elaborating on.
Thank you. So, I mean, the students from these markets have key motivations as to why they want to study abroad. Quality of education is one factor. They see the advancement of their own careers as an area of importance. The exposure to different cultures is an attribute that entices them. Also, the appeal of building a global network as they extend their own relationships with fellow students and alumni. Yes, immigration is a key one. Some markets are really focused on wanting to immigrate to other nations, improving language proficiency, often in English. The environment in terms of how the education is developed in the other market vis-a-vis their own market is an appeal. And as we get older, we want personal independence. So that's also another reason as to why studying abroad could be of interest to some of these students.
And just wanted to add a small anecdote onto that, Philip, because these are absolutely like the primary motivators. And for all the marketers on the call today, and we'll be talking about this a little bit more, but hopefully some alarm bells are going off to say this is what's important to them. And there's a lot of survey data is reflecting this. Therefore, this is the right content to be talking about when you're addressing that audience. And we'll go through lots of examples to explain how that works.
So what we've decided to do here to kind of provide some more context is we made a profile on some of these markets. So the first one we have is China. The Chinese students highly value the prestige and ranking of the educational institution they seek to attend. And some of these elements that you're seeing here are elements to be emphasized in your marketing, in your messaging. The quality of teaching, the safety of the environment in that destination. They also think that investing in their education has a direct correlation towards their future career opportunities. So they really see that as an investment, which is not always the case in other societies. The living environment is really important to them. And of course, they'll prioritize in universities and schools that offer strong job placement services or career development programs after they finish or post-graduation. So some of these elements are key preferences of the Chinese student as to who and what they're looking for when they want to study abroad. Now, in terms of India, they're more budget conscious. They're more price sensitive. They're seeking affordable educational options. They have to actively seek scholarship, grants, or financial aid to support their study abroad opportunities. They'll prioritize hands-on experience and practical skills acquisition that will enhance employability. So this is a bit of a different mindset than their Chinese counterpart. They value long-term success rates of alumni, looking for institutions with a strong track record of graduates achieving significant professional milestone. Now, in terms of living environment, while important, it's not as important as other factors stated in this list. So the mindset of the Indian student, is different than the Chinese student in this context. The Vietnamese is also value driven, similar to India. Decisions are often influenced by the experiences of their friends and recommendations of family, so their network is super important. They seek high standards in education, preferring institutions renowned for their academic excellence and innovative teaching methodologies. Safety, super important for them. And they value the availability of university representative who can provide guidance and personalized information through fairs, visits, or local advisory services in Vietnam. And finally, for Japan, thank you. For Japan, they're interested in destinations that offer strong language acquisition opportunities and cultural experiences. They prefer destinations where scholarships or exchange programs are available to ease the financial costs of studying abroad. They look for a study destination that provides a comfortable and conducive living environment. They value the opportunities to build international connections that can benefit their future careers. So they're really thinking long term. And they prioritize institutions that offer career services and have a good track record as well to support them post-study. So there are some key nuances in the messaging, in the positioning of your organization, of your institution, and also whom should be speaking on your behalf towards these markets. You'll notice that their lenses are different, which supports having very specific marketing and highlights the advice that Des highlighted of having a Asia specific marketing strategy.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Philip. I mean, none of these markets can be painted with a single brush.
No.
And obviously there are going to be nuances with each one that require different approaches. Culturally, this is very clear. But beyond that, the technical elements and what channels you use is very different. And this is what makes Asia quite a unique market, is that it has an incredibly fragmented digital ecosystem. So not only are you going to be talking about different things in different languages, but you'll need to do it on different channels too, because of the preferences and firewalls. So, if we take China, for example, primary channels here are, WeChat, Weibo, Baidu is the primary search engine there. But in India, they're using WhatsApp, Instagram, Telegram. All those Chinese channels I just mentioned are actually banned in India. So straight away, immediate divide there. To get to places like Vietnam, Meta channels like Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, and a homegrown channel called Zalo are primarily used. In Korea, KakaoTalk and Naver being the primary search engine. Take Japan, Line being the primary communication channel, and Yahoo being a prominent search engine there in the market. Even in what we would describe as sort of Greater China and different locales, Taiwan uses Line and Meta products, both of which you cannot use in mainland China. And then, of course, places like Malaysia and Singapore would be looking at WhatsApp and Telegram. So across the board here, in Thailand using Line and Meta products as well, there's a huge disparity on what channels you need to be using for what market. And it's not, some of them are profile preferences about just what channels they prefer to use in the market, but a lot of them are hard bans on the channels, and regulatory constraints. So this needs to be considered as well as part of your strategy is, okay, we want to go after all of these markets, but do we actually have the proper tools and capacity to do so? And in the interest of, diversity, and going after, a multitude of different markets altogether, this is an important consideration. Just to expand a little bit on the tech constraints, because this can often go overlooked. Across Asia, there are different firewalls in place, and different infrastructure is needed. And this comes in across as sort of bans on content from specific markets. So, like I mentioned, in India, a lot of the major Chinese channels are banned, just outright. And likewise, in China, a lot of the Western ones are banned, namely owned by Alphabet, which is Google's holding company, and Meta, Facebook's holding company. The inadvertent consequence of that, though, in China, in how the firewall works, and this is what gets mainly overlooked, is that it's designed to control the flow of information and block certain channels. The indirect consequence of that is that 80% of the Western internet doesn't work in China. Now, these firewalls are also applicable in places like Vietnam, but China, it's the most pronounced version of this. So your school or university or college's website may actually just not work in China, even though there's nothing wrong with the content. So this is a huge challenge, and one that obviously the technology overcomes at our end. And from HEM's perspective, we're able to create beautiful websites that are designed for that audience culturally. And hence why our partnership is so effective. But what this is important to understand for is that your ability to load in China is both a cultural sensitivity concern and a technical one. Those would be the determining factors as to whether you can pass through these firewalls or not. It's not just simply a matter of where physically is it hosted. And then we get into content sensitivity. Now, there's a difference between political and cultural, but without going too deep on the terminology, I think it's fair enough to suggest that both those things can be conflated when it comes to Asia as to what's a political sensitivity versus a cultural one, because these are often intertwined. So important to understand that in these markets, there are going to be sensitivities that will dictate what content is allowed and what isn't. I just talked about China as a classic example, but even in Vietnam, has absolutely prohibited any overt criticism of the Vietnamese government on any digital material published on their internet. And they make this a part of the terms and conditions of every channel that are used. They went so far as to threaten Facebook to pull their servers out of Vietnam if they didn't remove content critical of the Vietnamese government. And Facebook complied. This was in 2021. So really important to understand here that when you're producing content, especially as an educational institution, in the West, the political values that we have are not necessarily shared in the countries of origin. And it's part of the beauty of international education, right? Is an experience to see life like in a different context there. That being said, how you communicate and market, this needs to be taken into consideration. And on the technical end, data privacy. In Europe, this is a commonplace conversation given GDPR and its widespread, impact. But important to note that across Asia, a lot of markets are developing their own data privacy laws. China being one of the key ones here with their PIPL law they passed in 2021. One thing to note about this is that these laws are written, to be honest, and this is a subjective interpretation, somewhat vague. That way it can be, I guess the Western perspective on that is that it can be arbitrarily, I guess, used to contain, certain companies and their actions. But ultimately, the key thing to understand here is that those laws are written to be extraterritorial. That is, that they apply to you as a Western institution, even if you don't exist in China. But if you're using, say, a lead form to harvest Chinese citizens' data, the laws technically do apply to you. So whatever you do in China or any of these other markets as they roll out these laws, it needs to take into account what the regulations are and how you capture lead information or student and parent information out of the country and bring it to your own. So this is often a technical concern in terms of how the data is captured, moved, and treated once it's there. But it can be a content concern too in terms of how you disclose what you're going to do with the data. So if you do have any concerns about that, I'd recommend you speak to HEM or us to make sure you have the right setup for that. And I'll leave it to Philippe to expand more on the cultural side.
Thank you, Des. So we have a few slides to support some of the nuances that Des has shared in these markets. It's really important to understand and respect the cultural nuances of each region and tailoring recruitment strategies accordingly. And to do that, there's a few best practices or approaches you can take. The first one would be to use direct language, which is on the following slide in terms of the yes, that's right. Thank you, Des. So there, you can use direct language. Now, when you think about this, it can mean different things across cultures. You know, in some Asian cultures, being too blunt may seem as disrespectful. Hence, direct in this context should not forsake politeness and cultural sensitivity. Simple, straightforward language can prevent misunderstandings and convey respect by showing that you value the recipient's time and comprehension. The goal is to ensure the core message is not lost in translation or cultural interpretation. And to do so, you can tap into the local culture, integrating local culture elements into your promotional material can create a deep connection with the audience. It shows that you understand and value their cultural context, which can establish trust and credibility. Adapting your school's image and messaging to reflect the local aesthetics, values, and traditions can foster a stronger relationship with your audience for example, using local idioms, symbols, or storytelling methods that resonate with local narratives. So if you take your stuff that you've got in other markets, maybe in North America or in Europe, and you just use the same and even translate it in those other markets, you might have big surprises. We have an example to show you in a couple of slides that will illustrate what could be a big boo-boo. The next concept is the notion between translation and transcreation. So translation is literal. You translate the text word for word. I do this every day. French is my mother tongue, and I speak in English and French all the time, and I'm going back and forth. And even though the languages are similar, there are some key elements that even between, French and English languages could actually mean very different things. So I'm sensitive to that. So that's the literal aspect. The precision focuses on accuracy and the preservation of the original meaning. So in some cases, when you're presenting factual things, you have to be really straight to the point. The objective is to maintain the original tone, style, and intent without adjustment for cultural nuances. And this requires fluency in both the source and the target language. So this is the translation, and you can employ translators to help you translate your content, whereas transcreation is adaptive. You rework the original message to resonate culturally and emotionally with the target audience. It involves creative writing and marketing insights to reconstruct the message to reflect, the market that you're trying to attract or resonate with. There's a requirement for cultural alignment. You need to tailor the content to reflect the local nuances, values, and humor. Often changes to tone, style, or imagery to better suit the target's culture's preference. So there's a certain interpretation that's required, and requires not only language fluency, but also deep cultural understanding and market acumen. So there's a big contrast between simple translation and transcreation. And in the case of marketing in the markets that we're talking about today, you need a bit of both. And this was a big boo-boo from KFC. They literally translated "it's finger licking good," which meant in China, "eat your fingers off." So this is an older story, and probably many of you have heard of it before, but it illustrates that even a big corporation that has a lot of resources, if you don't think this through, you can make mistakes. So hopefully some of the tips we provided you today will be useful. And we have an example, just when you're thinking about layout, and if you're using the same layout for two different languages, it's important to give the layout some consideration so that it actually fits both types of vocabularies and the way that they're being written. So it's not always straightforward, and the best cases is to look at experience and apply the best practices to suit your requirements.
Yeah, it's hugely important, Philippe. I mean, yeah, we think of this like as being a major concern when you're switching from languages, say from English to Arabic, where it's left to right, but now it's right to left. So that completely changes the UI, the user interface, and the experience there. But when you're moving, say, from English letters to Chinese characters as well, it can have huge consequences for what the experience looks like, even though it's written in the same direction. Um, and not just about what it looks like, so generally speaking, where there's like more empty space where there otherwise wouldn't be. It could literally be how a sentence flows across multiple lines, which will look disjointed. So incredibly important to understand here. Automatic translations are just not going to be sufficient. That transcreation that you mentioned is so important. So we'll touch on each of these markets now to give you all a sense of exactly what you're going to need from a systems point of view and potentially a support point of view as well, to make sure that you have the right channels, you're doing the right thing on, and you know what to expect about what to get out of them. Because one of the things that HEM and Sinorbis focus on is that it's not a matter of going live and ticking a box and saying, okay, we did it. The students will come now. It's an ongoing optimization and an ongoing process to engage with your audience and build a profile and a brand. And that's how you get results. So ensuring that everyone's enabled to do that and have the right systems and support to achieve it. The first thing to mention for China is WeChat. Now, I know everyone here would have heard of WeChat, and we've touched on it already about that it's important, but I love this slide just to articulate exactly how important it is, because Westerners may not fully appreciate it. They think, okay, that's the Facebook of China, and that's actually not true at all. It's way more than that. Facebook wishes it was WeChat, in every sense of the word. Of course, they've got over 1 billion active users. So what does that mean? It means that 90% of China's population, regardless of age, demographic, profile, they all use WeChat. So it's ubiquitous. And it accounts for 1/3 of mobile traffic. In the West, we wouldn't have any single channel that could dare suggest that it accounts for 1/3 of all mobile traffic. It's a huge stat and shows how heavily it's used, not just for messaging and engaging, which is what, as an educational institution, that's what you would use it for. But in China, it's used for payments, reviews, bookings, literally everything under the sun. They've gone so far to create something called mini programs, which are apps within WeChat that you can leverage. They're full functioning apps. So it's an ecosystem that we don't have an equivalent for in the West. And it's essential to be on this channel to take China seriously. But where this really comes into place and the rubber meets the road for results, we know we need to be on WeChat, but it's used for publishing, right? You publish articles and you handle one-on-one messages there. But where the connection is between enrollment outcomes, the US did an amazing study on this and saw a high correlation between article reads and international students recruited. Not applications, by the way, actual recruitments. For every 100 article reads, an increase of 5 international students were recruited. So there is a strong connection here between how engaged people are on your content and how successful you're going to be recruiting students. For any statisticians on the call today, of course, I'll caveat by saying it's not a causation in that you see the 100 reads come up and then you've got 5 students immediately, but the correlation is there over the data, which is incredibly strong. So this really is what connects the concept of marketing to recruitment outcomes. It's incredibly important. And obviously the second thing to consider here is the foundational asset beyond WeChat, which is your website. A Chinese optimized website is going to be absolutely critical. UC Berkeley here, one of our clients, created their WeChat account and their Chinese website on the Sinorbis platform. And as you can see here, this is the Chinese version of it. The look and feel is still more or less the same. Their branding is taken consideration. But like what Philip was talking about earlier, they've needed to adjust and change the overall look to fit both Chinese user experience standards and the fact that you're operating in a new language. And that's how they've managed to develop this. So, they're accessible on search engines in China. It loads well in the market, and they're able to facilitate lead capture, or because they have the right systems in place. And then on to India. Very different ecosystem to China, of course. WhatsApp being the primary channel of choice there. Over 500 million users just in India. These are just Indian numbers, by the way. So, again, talking about the scale of these markets, they're not just other countries. It goes well beyond that. But the interesting bit, again, linking it into higher education and recruitment outcomes, survey data consistently shows 70% of Indian students prefer WhatsApp for communication. So in your engagement strategy, if it involves sending emails to people, your conversion rates will naturally be lower as opposed to using WhatsApp. And this is an important one, not just for prospective students and parents as they're doing their initial search, but even your existing applicants that you have an existing application for that you want to nurture during that process and ensure that they choose your institution. Being able to communicate them on WhatsApp will be essential. So not just having the system set up, but ensuring that you have the right means to communicate at the right scale for all of these people. It's incredibly important. Simply giving a personal WhatsApp account to a person in an institution to look after may actually not be sufficient. The reason why you may need a WhatsApp business platform account, it's basically for anyone who wants to do activity beyond what a Ma and Pa store would do, or a cafe down the road, where you have an immediate neighborhood of people to engage with. If you want to send a broadcast message to more than 250 people at any point in time, you will need what's called a WhatsApp business platform account, which can only be used if you have the right digital experience software to manage, like Sinorbis. It allows for automated responses, so you can set up automations there. You can have lead generation by setting up WhatsApp landing pages, broadcast messaging, which is not limited in terms of how many people you can be targeting, tied in with personalized communication on the template side. So you can create templates for those broadcasts and automatically sub in names and details for every person. So it completely changes the dynamic on what you're able to do on this channel and how you can leverage it. And the expected results always are higher conversion and larger ability to spread your brand because you have the right channel. There's some other little details here that show the difference between basic WhatsApp accounts and the business platform. But of course, happy to go into detail if anyone wants post this webinar to speak with Philip or myself, and we can go into more detail of what the difference between those accounts are and what that means for you. And I'll leave this one for you, Philip, to talk about how they're actually going to be utilized in the market.
Yeah, so there are 4 different categories of conversations you can enable or have with your WhatsApp business platform account. which uses an API connected to the Sinorbis platform. This is important, contrary to the personal WhatsApp, where we can just send free messages or free form messages as needed. WhatsApp wants you to enable a conversation, and to start these conversations, you have to initiate them with a approved template within one of these 4 categories. And once you initiate the conversation with an approved template, it opens a messaging window where you can actually message the user. Typically, it's for 24 hours until it stops. And when it stops, you have to reinitiate that new conversation window of 24 hours with an approved template. So this is where having the support from an organization like Sinorbis or HEM will help you leverage the technology and get the approvals of these templates, because they are stringent. You can't do what you want, but once you've got them approved, it's super powerful. And there's great use cases to, you talked about, the engagement with applicants. Well, that's a great way to message all your applicants and nurture them so that they can actually complete the application process and start or follow up with inquiries. Well, there are many cases you can leverage the business platform, which is one main nuance is usually the personal platform is one phone number, one human, whereas this enables your whole team to use for your whole database with very large numbers of broadcasts per day, which I think is over about up to 100,000 per day you can send out. So we wanted to kind of illustrate some of the nuances, because there's sometimes confusion. Well, can I use my own WhatsApp to do this? And there are processes that are needed.
Yes, well, so now to talk about Vietnam a little bit. Now we mentioned that Vietnam has a couple of options here. Zalo is the primary channel there. It's a homegrown messaging channel that's basically on its way to become WeChat of Vietnam in many respects. A huge percentage of the population use it, 73 million people. That's basically the entire adult population using Zalo in Vietnam. Of incredibly high usage rate there. And 2 billion messages are sent per day. Now that may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but it's a high usage rate per person. That being said, it's primarily been used for domestic communication, and international communication is typically used on meta platforms like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. We'll touch on that in a second. But just before I do, important to mention Vietnamese websites and why they're important. Vietnam has a firewall akin to China's, although not as severe. So there are still loading time issues for Western assets in Vietnam. And websites taking, say, an extra 10 seconds to load each page, well, that may not sound like a lot. From a user experience point of view, it is.
Oh yeah,
So,
bad.
yeah. Oh, sorry, Philippe.
No, I was gonna say it's bad.
Yeah,
It's a long
it's
time.
terrible.
Yeah.
The bounce rates are going to jump up to an unreasonable level. So if you ran any campaigns or spent money to drive traffic to your website, the traffic will bounce at a higher rate than otherwise would. Basically means you're wasting money. And so, especially from a user experience, it's not fun, but also just cynically, from a business point of view, it's a terrible place to be. So important to ensure that whatever you have for Vietnam is accessible in the market. And beyond that, ideally, is in Vietnamese language. And we've talked about this before with China. But one thing I want to mention that why it's so important here is that the key decision makers for the ability for a student to study abroad is more often than not the parents. And they don't have an English language requirement. So important to ensure that the content you're producing is applicable for them. And beyond that, if we want a website to be accessible in the market, it needs to be found on search engines. In Vietnam, people will be using Vietnamese keywords on Google to find these websites. So you would ideally want Vietnamese keywords on your website to be more accessible. So these steps and efforts to create and go through the effort of creating Vietnamese content, it does pay off in the long run. because you're able to be that much more accessible and visible in the market. But back to Zalo, and the answer, at least estimated answer as to why Zalo is used primarily for domestic purposes, is because it's really hard for Western businesses to create a Zalo account. Not too dissimilar to WeChat maybe 10, 15 years ago. In that, to create an official Zalo account for your school, you're going to need a personal Zalo account that is official, verified, and authenticated. And the only way to do that is to be a Vietnamese citizen with all the correct documentation. So this is a bit of an issue for Western companies because let's say even if you were able to have the help of a Vietnamese citizen to create it, the account will be inherently tied to that individual. And this could be a potential risk for your business going forward. If that person won the lottery and retired the next day, what do you do? So in this case, at least as it stands today at the timing of this webinar, it's very difficult to create Zalo accounts. And that's why the meta platforms like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger are probably the best bet in the interim. And because of these delays in terms of making it accessible for Western companies, the integration onto the Sinorbis platform will likely be 2025 next year to compensate for that. And finally, we have Japan. Before we get into questions, which I'm sure you all have many, but Line is the channel of choice in Japan. It has a very high usage rate. Again, like similar stats to Zalo. And the difference here, though, is that Line can be used internationally quite easily. And so it's the channel of choice, not just for domestic communication, but international as well. And of course, the same concepts on websites apply in Japan. Less so on the firewall side because they don't have a stringent firewall like Vietnam does. But in terms of the layout and design and language, even more so in Vietnam, given the very low rates of English across the country. So important to understand that when you create a website, you'd want it not only to be accessible in the right language and layout, but if you're looking for real spread and awareness, to be accessible on channels like Yahoo. Yahoo still being one of the major search engines in Japan, sharing market share with Google, an important consideration. And in Korea, it will be Naver. So it's not just China's Baidu that is that's pushing Google away. So Line is going to be integrated into the Sinorbis platform for fall this year, which is very exciting. And important to note for any schools here on the account creation side is that these accounts can be created. And you can speak to HEM or Sinorbis to help you create this account. The current challenge for Western companies is to verify the account, which is currently limited to Japan, Taiwan, Thailand, and Indonesia, those countries where Line is primarily used. So active solutions are being looked into this right now. But important to understand that if you were to go by yourself to try and create an account and verify it, it may be very, very difficult to do. So if you do have any questions on that, come speak to us about that, and we can absolutely share with you what steps you probably need to take.
We wanted to have a few slides to highlight the strength of the partnership between Sinorbis and HEM, leveraging the expertise and technology of Sinorbis and our expertise in terms of digital marketing agency since 2008 combined, providing that expertise and flexibility and creativity and all, of course, return on investment of your Asian marketing initiatives. And HEM, we're also focused on initiatives that are worldwide in terms of the channels. So we do a lot of activities on Google, Meta, but also the ones that Des highlighted. We're a multi-channel agency that can support SEO, content, email to help you create those initiatives for those markets. And we've been doing this since 2008. Actually, this year is our 15th anniversary, so we're really excited to partner with you, Des, and your team to rock it.
Likewise, likewise.
So if any of you have any questions, if you can pop them into the Q&A um, box in Zoom. Here, I was wondering, ask you, Des, what initial strategies, should a school employ on WeChat to build a strong following and attract students quickly? What should they do?
Yeah, I think the way to do that, there are two ways. There's a very quick way, which is targeted ad campaigns, right? To go into your market to find your audience. And if you have some first party data on previous students that where you've recruited them from, or web traffic data, that would be a really good place to start to be targeting those audiences, particularly because China's so big. If you ran a media campaign across the country, it will evaporate in a second. So important to be very targeted there, but that can be effective. But the other thing is coming back to that QS study about reads of your posts following through into recruitment numbers. So it's really important to increase the number of followers and engagement on your reads. And the best way to do that is to create content that people care about, enjoy, and are likely to share with their networks. So in that respect, one example I'm thinking off the top of my head, just because they're close to me here, is the University of Oregon. In having the right feedback mechanism and using the Sinorbis platform for their analytics, they're able to understand what content resonated with their market and see the results firsthand at every post they made. And so they changed and optimized their content over time and their content strategy. And in the first 12 months, increased their followers by 1,000 followers simply through organic sharing of their posts. So not a single dollar was spent on media, which is absolutely incredible. And of course, that flowed through into the recruitment outcomes for that following year. So something to consider there is making sure that, again, it's not just simply going live on WeChat and thinking, okay, it's happening, we're posting, but having the right expertise in place to ensure that it's being managed properly and that you're optimizing what you're doing on the channel to get more results. And then you can start measuring your effectiveness in terms of how many leads per month do we get from WeChat, which is a good place to be.
Thank you, Des. We have another question here. As a university doing online campaigns on social media, is it better to use European Asian faces if we'd like to attract Asian students? So the question is, the actual persona in the imagery that should be used to do better. What do you think?
This is such a good question. Yeah. So look, the short answer from our perspective and what we've seen work is that yes, it's important to show some Asian faces in your material. This is primarily important because of some of the survey data that's come back and that Philip you talked about was that safety is a key priority.
Yeah.
One of the elements of safety is seeing that, hey, people that look like me, that are from the same culture as me, have had that experience, succeeded, and had a great time. So to visually represent that is really important. I wouldn't suggest going overboard and only having that, because ultimately it's your genuine campus experience that you're wanting to convey, which is, in most cases, a highly multicultural experience.
Yeah.
But I would definitely suggest making sure that's included, but not dominating.
Yeah, social proof is, I agree with you. I think social proof is always, in some cultures, an important element to have them tip and decide and act. And those could be leveraged in other channels beyond the initial touch point. And tracking and analytics and seeing what's working and not, and adjusting in real time. But I think having a mix in this particular case and highlight that multicultural element would be where I would start with. And I think it's fair to say that in our webinar today we've touched on some of the macro components of the Asian strategy, but there's a lot more to the Sinorbis platform as to what it could do in terms of its tools, to enable and support your initiatives in those markets. So I would encourage all of you to reach out to either Des or myself for any questions you have post-webinar. We are just a bit over, so we'll wrap up, Des. But I wanted to thank you very much for providing this great, really, the experience you have in the market has been phenomenal, and it's quite clear that any organization or institution that wants to go and really be serious about attracting Asian students with its own strategy online needs Sinorbis. So I want to thank you, and we'll be sending out the slides tomorrow in the recording. By all means, don't be shy to reach out to Des and I. We're easy to reach. We're friendly. We don't bite.
Thank you, Philippe. Absolutely. Looking forward to the partnership and yeah, continuing the chat with anybody who would like to. Thank you all for your time today. We'll speak
Yes.
soon.
Thank you very much, everyone. Be well. Thank you. Bye-bye.